The relentless ache of broken heart. Since the day of Durika and Ruta's wedding, Kodo had found himself ensnared in a spiral of despair and powerlessness. Once a warrior of indomitable spirit, he now struggled under the weight of his own insignificance. The cunning machinations of Ruta had stripped him of everything: his love, his honor, and even his identity. Now, with no means to prove his innocence and no way to fight back, Kodo felt diminished, a shadow of the man he once was. The world, vast and indifferent, seemed to mock him with each passing day, deepening his sadness and disappointment. Without a home to return to, his father's residence having reverted to public property upon President Natsu's death, Kodo rented a modest room in the poorer district of the city. The room was small, the walls bare except for patches of peeling paint, and the single window was grimy and obscured, offering a view of the bustling streets below. It was a far cry from the life he had once known, a stark reflection of the inner turmoil that now consumed him. During the day, Kodo toiled in menial jobs, doing whatever he could to eke out a living. With his identification number and account erased by Ruta, he had no choice but to take whatever work he could find, jobs that required no name and no questions. The work was hard, the pay meager, but it was enough to keep him afloat, at least for now. Yet every task, every hour spent laboring, only served to remind him of how far he had fallen, how utterly powerless he had become. As night fell, the weight of the day's struggles pressed heavily on Kodo's shoulders. It was in these moments, when the darkness closed in around him, that he sought solace in the numbness of intoxication. Each evening, after finishing his work, Kodo would retreat to the local tavern, the only place where he could momentarily escape the relentless ache of his broken heart. In his inebriated state, Kodo would often drift into dreams where he was the groom, and Durika, radiant and smiling, was the bride. They would walk hand in hand to the wedding podium, their love shining brighter than the stars above. In these fleeting moments, Kodo felt a happiness that eluded him in waking life, a brief respite from the torment that had become his daily existence. But the dreams were fleeting, the happiness ephemeral, and when he awoke, the cold light of reality would come crashing back down, leaving him more broken than before. The tavern became Kodo's second home, a place where he could drown his sorrows in drink and lose himself in the haze of alcohol. The bitter sting of the liquor offered a temporary reprieve from the pain, numbing the ache in his heart and dulling the sharp edges of his despair. But no matter how much he drank, the relief was always short-lived. The alcohol could not erase the memories, could not fill the void that had been left by Durika's absence. In the solitude of his rented room, Kodo grappled with the relentless onslaught of despair. Each passing day seemed to blur into the next, a monotonous cycle of survival devoid of purpose or hope. The memory of Durika's tearful acceptance of Ruta's proposal haunted him, a painful reminder of the love he had lost and the life he would never have. The room, with its peeling paint and grimy window, became a prison, a constant reminder of the life he had been forced to leave behind. The city outside continued to bustle with life, its people unaware of the turmoil that raged within Kodo's heart. He moved through the streets like a ghost, unseen and unnoticed by those around him. His once strong shoulders now stooped under the burden of his sorrow, his gaze hollow and vacant. The memories of happier times, moments spent with Durika, their laughter, and their dreams, were all that sustained him, but even these memories began to fade, growing more distant with each passing day. Lost in his despair, Kodo found himself drawn to the familiar comfort of the local tavern. The dim glow of flickering candles, the murmur of drunken conversation, and the clinking of glasses provided a backdrop to his misery. Here, among the lost souls who frequented the tavern, Kodo sought solace in the oblivion of intoxication. The alcohol offered a temporary escape from the relentless ache in his heart, numbing his senses to the pain that threatened to consume him. But even as he drank, Kodo could not escape the haunting specter of Durika's absence. Her face lingered in his thoughts, her voice a distant echo that whispered through the haze of his drunken stupor. In his intoxication, he would sometimes imagine that she was there with him, sitting beside him, her hand resting gently on his. But when he reached out to touch her, she would vanish like smoke, leaving him alone in the darkness. The bartender, a grizzled old gorilla with a weathered face and a sympathetic gaze, had watched Kodo's decline with a mixture of pity and concern. He had seen many men like Kodo before, men who had been broken by life, who had lost everything and found solace only in the bottom of a glass. But there was something different about Kodo, something that made the bartender hesitate before offering another drink. Another round, the bartender asked one night, his voice gentle yet tinged with sorrow. Kodo nodded silently, his eyes fixed on the half-empty glass before him. He knew that no amount of alcohol could ever hope to fill the void in his heart, but still, he clung to the fleeting illusion of numbness it provided. Each sip was a small act of defiance against the pain that threatened to overwhelm him. But even as he drank, the gnawing ache of loneliness consumed him. In the depths of his despair, he longed for the warmth of Durika's embrace, the sound of her laughter ringing in his ears. But she was gone, lost to him forever, and in her absence, he was adrift in a sea of darkness. The memories that had once brought him comfort now only served to deepen the wound, reminding him of everything he had lost and would never have again. As the night wore on, the tavern emptied of its patrons. The laughter and noise that had filled the room gradually faded, leaving behind a heavy silence that pressed down on Kodo like a weight. He remained seated at the bar, lost in the labyrinth of his own despair, staring blankly at the empty glass in front of him. The alcohol, once a balm to his pain, now felt like poison, its effects dulling his senses but doing nothing to alleviate the deep, aching void within him. The bartender wiped down the counter, his movements slow and methodical. He glanced at Kodo, a flicker of concern crossing his withered features. "You should go home, son," he said softly, setting down the rag. "No good will come of staying here all night." Kodo looked up, his eyes bloodshot and glazed with the effects of too much drink. For a moment, he seemed to consider the bartender's words, but then he shook his head. "Home," he echoed bitterly. "Where is home, old man?" "I have no home." "Not anymore." The bartender sighed, recognizing the deep sorrow in Kodo's voice. He had heard it before, in others who had been through similar ordeals, but there was something in Kodo's eyes that made his heart ache with sympathy. "You're still alive," the bartender replied gently. "As long as you're breathing, there's always a chance to find your way back. But not like this. Not drowning yourself in drink." Kodo's lips curled into a wry smile, but there was no humor in it. "Back to what?" he asked, his voice heavy with resignation. "There's nothing left for me. No one left. I've lost everything. And the one thing that mattered." His voice trailed off, the words too painful to speak aloud. The bartender watched him for a long moment, his expression somber. He had no easy answers to give, no words of comfort that could ease the pain Kodo was feeling. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the hardest part is just getting through the night. But you have to try, son. You have to keep going, even when it feels like there's no reason to. Because you never know, tomorrow might be different." Kodo met the bartender's gaze, and for a moment, something like hope flickered in his eyes. But it was quickly extinguished, replaced by the deep well of despair that had taken root in his heart. He looked away, unable to hold the bartender's kind gaze any longer. "Tomorrow," he muttered, more to himself than to the bartender. "Maybe tomorrow." The bartender didn't press him further. He simply nodded, understanding that some battles had to be fought alone. "Take care of yourself," he said softly as Kodo rose unsteadily from his seat. Kodo nodded absently, not really hearing the words. He fumbled for a few coins and placed them on the counter before turning to leave. His footsteps were heavy as he made his way to the door, the weight of his sorrow dragging him down with every step. Outside, the cool morning air hit him like a slap, clearing his head just enough for him to realize how lost he truly was. The streets were deserted, the city still asleep as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. Kodo walked aimlessly, his feet carrying him through the quiet, empty streets without any real direction or purpose. The city that had once been his home now felt like a foreign land, a place where he no longer belonged. As he wandered, Kodo's thoughts drifted back to Durika. He could still see her face in his mind, the way she had looked at the wedding, radiant, beautiful, but with a sadness in her eyes that mirrored his own. He knew that she had made a choice that had torn them apart, but it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. The memory of her acceptance of Ruta's proposal was like a knife in his heart, a wound that refused to heal. Kodo's steps grew slower as he neared a small park, its benches and trees bathed in the soft light of dawn. He collapsed onto one of the benches, his body heavy with exhaustion. The park was empty, the only sound the distant chirping of birds welcoming the new day. But to Kodo, it felt like the end of everything. He buried his face in his hands, his mind swirling with the same thoughts that had plagued him for weeks. How had it all gone so wrong? How had he lost everything that mattered to him? He had been a hero once, a man of honor and strength, but now he was nothing. Just a broken man, alone in a world that had turned its back on him. In his despair, Kodo felt the tears begin to well up in his eyes. He had fought them for so long, refusing to give in to the overwhelming grief that threatened to consume him. But now, in the quiet of the park, with no one around to see, he finally let them fall. The tears came slowly at first, then faster, until he was sobbing uncontrollably, the weight of his sorrow too much to bear. He cried for the life he had lost, for the love that had been stolen from him, for the man he used to be but could never be again. The tears flowed freely, washing away the last remnants of his pride, leaving him raw and vulnerable. For a long time, Kodo sat there, his body racked with sobs, the pain of his broken heart laid bare for the world to see. But as the tears began to subside, a strange numbness settled over him. It was as if he had cried out all the emotion he had left, leaving behind only a hollow emptiness. The world seemed distant, disconnected from him, and he from it. The pain was still there, but it was dulled now, muted by the sheer exhaustion of his grief. In this state of numbness, Kodo's thoughts turned once more to Durika. In his mind, he could see her walking towards him, her figure hazy and indistinct. She was smiling, her eyes filled with the love that had once been theirs. But as she drew closer, her form began to waver, flickering like a candle in the wind. And then, just as she reached out to touch him, she disappeared, leaving Kodo alone once more. The vision of Durika haunted him as he sat there in the park, the first rays of sunlight warming his face. He knew it was just a figment of his imagination, a product of his broken heart and the alcohol still coursing through his veins. But it felt real, so real that for a moment, he had reached out to her, desperate to hold on to the last shred of happiness he had known. But she was gone, and with her, all hope of reclaiming the life they had once shared. Kodo knew that now, in a way he hadn't fully understood before. The finality of it settled over him like a heavy blanket, crushing what little resolve he had left. He was lost, adrift in a sea of despair, with no way forward and no way back. The life he had known, the love he had cherished, were gone, replaced by a darkness that threatened to consume him whole. And in that darkness, Kodo found himself slipping further and further away from the man he had once been, into a void that offered no comfort, no escape. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Kodo remained on the bench, his body slumped in defeat. The city around him began to wake, its people going about their lives, unaware of the broken man who sat among them, lost in his own sorrow. For Kodo, the world had become a shadowy labyrinth of pain and loss, a maze from which there was no escape. And as he stumbled through its winding corridors, he knew that he was utterly alone, a solitary figure adrift in a sea of darkness. But even in his darkest moments, a flicker of something remained, a tiny ember deep within that refused to be extinguished. Perhaps it was the memory of his father, of President Natsu's words before his death, or perhaps it was something else, some small, stubborn part of Kodo that refused to give up entirely. Deep within his heart, Kodo clung to the belief that someday, somehow, he would find a way to reclaim the happiness that had been stolen from him. He didn't know how, and he didn't know when, but he held on to that hope with everything he had left. And until that day dawned, he would continue to wander the lonely streets, searching for a glimmer of light in the enveloping darkness. The spark of redemption. The situation had remained stagnant for what felt like an eternity. Kodo, once a figure of strength and determination, had spiraled further into the abyss of alcohol and despair, losing sight of his purpose, his ideals, and even his own identity. For 3 long months, he lived a life devoid of meaning, existing as a mere shell of the vibrant and charismatic individual he had once been. He had become a coward, a man who sought refuge from the haunting memories of a painful past and the numbing embrace of alcohol. Each day seemed to blend into the next, a monotonous cycle of waking to the haze of a hangover, stumbling through the motions of survival, and seeking solace once more in the oblivion offered by drink. The world outside continued its relentless march forward, indifferent to Kodo's descent into darkness. The once bright fire that had burned within him had dimmed to a flicker, threatening to extinguish entirely under the weight of his sorrow. But amidst the suffocating fog of his despair, an unexpected visitor breached the walls of Kodo's self-imposed isolation. One dreary afternoon, as Kodo lay in a stupor on his unmade bed, there was a knock at the door, a sound so foreign in his current existence that it took a moment for it to register. Bleary-eyed and disoriented, Kodo stumbled to the door, barely conscious of the fact that he had not received any visitors since his fall from grace. Opening the door, he found himself face to face with a chimpanzee he did not recognize. The stranger was older, with a weathered face that bore the marks of time and experience, and eyes that gleamed with a sharp intelligence. There was something about this visitor, something that stirred a distant memory within Kodo, though his alcohol-clouded mind struggled to place it. "Who are you?" Kodo slurred, his voice rough from days of drinking. "What do you want?" The chimpanzee regarded Kodo with a mixture of disappointment and compassion. "I am Joku," he said, his voice calm and steady. "A scholar, and I have come to you on a mission." Kodo blinked, trying to make sense of the situation. Joku? The name meant nothing to him in his current state. He was about to dismiss the stranger and retreat back into the comforting darkness of his room when Joku stepped forward, uninvited, and crossed the threshold into the cluttered confines of Kodo's small apartment. As Joku entered, his gaze swept over the disarray, the empty bottles strewn across the floor, the unwashed dishes piled high in the sink, and the stale, pungent odor that permeated the air. He took it all in with a quiet, measured gaze, and then turned his attention back to Kodo. "You really don't deserve the body your parents gave you," Joku remarked, his tone devoid of malice but heavy with truth. The words hit Kodo like a slap to the face, cutting through the fog of his inebriation. For a moment, he simply stared at Joku, stunned into silence. Something about the stranger's demeanor, his calm authority, forced Kodo to take him seriously despite his current state. "Who are you really?" Kodo finally asked, a sliver of clarity piercing through the haze. "How do you know my parents?" Joku's expression softened slightly, and he offered Kodo a gentle smile that belied the gravity of his next words. "I am your father's friend, Kodo," he said, his voice steady. "Your biological father, who brought you into this world." The revelation hung in the air, casting a pall over the room as Kodo grappled with the implications of Joku's words. It was as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet, appending everything he thought he knew. For years, Kodo had wandered adrift in a sea of uncertainty, haunted by the specter of his past and the unanswered questions that lingered in its wake. Now, faced with the truth of his lineage, he found himself teetering on the precipice of a newfound understanding, a reckoning with the demons that had long plagued him. The revelation struck Kodo with the force of a tidal wave, overwhelming him with a surge of emotions he had long suppressed. Anger, confusion, and a deep, aching sadness all warred within him, threatening to drag him further into the abyss. But amidst the chaos, there was also a flicker of something else, a spark of hope, faint but persistent, that dared to defy the darkness that had consumed him for so long. Joku watched the tumultuous emotions play out on Kodo's face, his expression one of quiet patience. He knew that this moment was crucial, that the words he chose could either reignite the fire within Kodo or extinguish it for good. After what felt like an eternity, Kodo found his voice. "Why have you come to me now?" he asked, his tone a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "Why reveal this to me after all these years?" Joku's response was measured, his words laden with purpose. "I have come to offer you a chance at redemption, Kodo," he explained, his gaze never wavering from Kodo's. "To help you reclaim the life that has slipped through your fingers and find the strength to confront the darkness that threatens to consume you." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them, punctuated only by the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. Kodo felt the weight of Joku's words settle upon him, a burden and a promise intertwined. The scholar's presence, his calm assurance, stirred something deep within Kodo, a sense of purpose that he had not felt in what seemed like a lifetime. But even as Joku's words resonated with him, Kodo could not ignore the nagging doubts that gnawed at the edges of his resolve. Could he really find redemption? Could he reclaim the life he had lost, or was he too far gone, too broken to ever hope for such a thing? Joku seemed to sense Kodo's hesitation, and he stepped closer, his gaze intense and unwavering. "I know you are struggling, Kodo," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I know the pain you carry, the burden of your past. But you are not alone in this. You have the strength within you to overcome this darkness, to rise above the circumstances that have brought you low." Kodo looked into Joku's eyes and saw a reflection of his own pain, but also a deep well of wisdom and understanding. In that moment, something shifted within him, a decision made not by the mind, but by the heart. The spark of hope that Joku had ignited began to grow, fanned by the belief that perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a way forward. With a nod, Kodo acknowledged Joku's offer, his heart heavy with the weight of the journey that lay ahead. But as he stood on the threshold of redemption, he knew that he could no longer turn away from the path that beckoned him, a path fraught with challenges, yet illuminated by the possibility of a new beginning. As Joku extended a hand, Kodo hesitated only for a moment before grasping it firmly. The gesture, simple yet profound, signaled the start of something new, something that would demand every ounce of his strength, courage, and determination. "Thank you," Kodo murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know where this road will lead, but I'm ready to try." Joku's smile deepened, his eyes shining with approval. "That's all I ask, Kodo. That you try. The rest will follow." And so, in that small, cluttered room, amidst the remnants of a life Kodo had nearly lost to despair, the spark of redemption was kindled. It was a fragile flame, vulnerable to the winds of doubt and fear, but it was there, a light in the darkness, guiding Kodo back to the man he was meant to be. As they left the room together, Kodo felt the weight of the past begin to lift, replaced by the burden of a new purpose. The road ahead would be long and arduous, filled with uncertainties and trials that would test him to his core. But for the first time in months, Kodo felt a sense of direction, a reason to keep moving forward. And as they stepped out into the crisp morning air, the city seemed to take on a different hue, a promise of hope amidst the challenges that awaited. Kodo knew that the journey would not be easy, but with Joku by his side, he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Together, they walked into the dawn, the first light of a new day breaking over the horizon, a symbol of the second chance that Kodo had been given. The nightmare that had held him captive for so long was finally beginning to fade, replaced by the awakening of a new chapter in his life, a chapter that would see him rise from the ashes of his past, stronger and more determined than ever before. The secrets of the past. Kodo's gasp resonated through the small, dimly lit room, the sound echoing in the stillness as he grappled with the revelation that had just shattered the foundations of his world. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he could only stare at Joku in disbelief. The words had been simple, yet their implications were profound, life-altering. Kodo's mind raced, a whirlwind of emotions and thoughts clashing within him. "My biological father?" Kodo stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The weight of the revelation pressed down on him, leaving him both exhilarated and overwhelmed. "So, you know about my identity?" His voice trembled, a mix of hope and fear evident in his tone. The idea that this stranger, this old chimpanzee, could hold the answers to the questions that had haunted him his entire life was almost too much to comprehend. Joku, the old chimpanzee, responded with a slow, deliberate nod and a warm smile that conveyed both understanding and reassurance. "Yes, Kodo," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of many years. "I know the truth about who you are. I know about your parents, your true parents, and the circumstances of your birth." The words hung in the air, heavy with significance. For so long, Kodo had wondered about his origins, had questioned where he truly came from, and why his life had taken the path it had. Despite the love and care he had received from President Natsu, who had raised him as his own, there had always been a lingering sense of incompleteness, a yearning to know the truth about his biological parents. Now, standing on the precipice of that truth, Kodo felt a surge of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. Overcome with happiness and curiosity, Kodo couldn't contain the torrent of questions that flooded his mind. He felt like a child again, eager for answers, desperate to understand the mysteries that had eluded him for so long. Who were they? He asked, his voice laced with excitement and a touch of trepidation. What were they like? Why did they leave me? But even as the question spilled from his lips, a hint of skepticism crept into Kodo's thoughts. This chimpanzee, this stranger, had appeared out of nowhere, claiming to know the most intimate details of his life. How could that be? Kodo's eyes narrowed slightly as he regarded Joku, a cautious edge entering his voice. Why do you know me? He asked, his tone probing, seeking clarity. Why do you know my biological parents? Joku's expression remained serene, his eyes reflecting the wisdom of a lifetime spent observing, understanding, and perhaps waiting for this very moment. I know, Joku replied calmly, his voice steady and reassuring. I have known everything about you from the moment you were born until this very day. I have watched over you, even when you did not know it. I have seen your struggles, your triumphs, and your moments of despair. Kodo's heart skipped a beat as Joku continued, recounting the key moments of his life with an accuracy that left no room for doubt. I know about your conflicts with Ruda, Joku said, his voice carrying a note of empathy. I know about your selection for the Potential Admiralty Committee, the great honor it bestowed upon you, and the burden it placed on your shoulders. I know about the day President Natsu died, the anguish you felt, and the injustice that followed. Your arrest, your trial, and the anger you felt at Ruda and Durika's wedding. I know it all, Kodo. Kodo's surprise deepened, and he found himself staring at Joku in awe, realizing that this mysterious chimpanzee had been silently observing his life events, perhaps even guiding them in ways Kodo could not comprehend. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, a mixture of awe and apprehension settling over him. Who was this being that seemed to know everything about him, that had watched his life unfold from the shadows? Curious about the timing of this revelation, Kodo pressed on with another question, his voice tinged with a mix of curiosity and desperation. Why now? He asked, his brow furrowing slightly. Why did you choose this time to come see me? Why reveal all of this now, after everything that's happened? Joku's gaze softened, and he took a step closer to Kodo, his presence calming, almost fatherly. Timing is everything, he explained, his voice gentle yet firm. Choosing when to appear and when to reveal secrets is crucial. In your current state of despair, Kodo, I could no longer remain hidden. You were lost, drowning in your sorrow, and I knew that if I did not intervene, you might never find your way back. I had to come now, to revive you, to show you that there is still hope. As the truth unfolded, Kodo's eyes welled up with tears, the sincerity in Joku's words breaking through the barriers he had built around his heart. It was as if a dam had burst within him, releasing the pent-up emotions that had been festering for so long. Overcome with a mix of relief, gratitude, and an overwhelming sense of connection, Kodo felt the tears spill over, tracing silent paths down his cheeks. He looked at Joku, his vision blurred by the tears, and pleaded, his voice thick with emotion, "Please, tell me about my father. What was he like? Why did he leave me?" Echoes of the past. Kodo sat in stunned silence, the weight of Joku's words pressing heavily on his heart. The revelation of his father's identity, his real father, not just the man who had raised him, left him reeling, a tidal wave of emotions crashing over him. It was too much to process all at once, and yet, he knew he had to hear more. There was a deep need within him to understand, to piece together the fragments of his past and uncover the truth that had been hidden from him for so long. Joku's voice, warm and gentle, broke the silence, offering Kodo a lifeline in the storm of his thoughts. Your father, Kaki, was a true hero, Joku began, his words infused with a mix of pride and sorrow. You are inheriting the same traits from him, Kodo. His name was Kaki, and he was an extraordinary individual. Generous to a fault, he forged many friendships and was always ready to assist those in need. He was born healthy and strong, and from a young age, he dedicated himself to mastering martial arts. His dedication and skill earned him a place among the top practitioners of his time. Your father, Kaki, was not only my friend, but also my relative and mentor. As Joker spoke, his eyes glimmered with fond memories of the past, yet there was a shadow of sorrow in them, perhaps even the beginnings of tears. The memories of Kaki seemed to stir something deep within Joku, a mixture of admiration and grief that he could barely contain. Kodo listened intently, feeling a connection to this man he had never known, a man whose blood ran in his veins. Kaki taught me martial arts, Joku continued, his voice steady but laced with emotion. He trained alongside me for years. Many people adored your father, Kodo. He held a special place in their hearts because of his kindness, his strength, and his unwavering sense of justice. But, for some reason... Here, Joku hesitated, as if unsure how to continue. Kodo, desperate to know more, leaned forward, his voice urgent. What happened next? Please, speak quickly. Joku took a deep breath, as if steeling himself to recount the painful events that had led to Kaki's death. Your father was part of the Potential Admiralty Committee, much like you, he explained. He was respected and admired by many, but there were those who envied him, who feared his influence and the power he wielded. In the final match, he faced General Hurus, Ruda's father. It was a battle that tested both their skills and their resolve. Joku paused, his gaze distant as he recalled the fateful day. After the match, on the way home, Kaki was ambushed. He was riding his motorbike when a group of 20 armed hyenas confronted him. It was an orchestrated attack, a trap meant to ensure he would never reach home. Despite the odds, your father fought back with everything he had. He killed over 15 hyenas, but in the end, he sustained severe injuries. His body was broken, but his spirit remained unbowed. Kodo felt a surge of anger well up within him as he listened to Joku's account. The thought of his father, Kaki, fighting for his life against such overwhelming odds, filled him with a sense of helpless rage. How could anyone have done this to him? How could they have taken such a good and honorable man from the world? Joku's voice grew softer as he continued. Your father tried to make his way home, but his injuries were too great. It was then that I visited your family. Your mother was there, in tears, assisting him as best she could. Kaki knew he didn't have much time left, but he was determined to see you one last time, to make sure you were safe. He told your mother, take good care of Kodo. When he grows up, he will discover who killed me. Those were his last words, Kodo. And with that, he let out a terrible roar, a sound so powerful that it felt like it could shatter eardrums. Your mother covered her bleeding ears, and as she did, she witnessed your father's passing. The room fell silent as Joku finished his story, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. Kodo could hardly breathe, his mind reeling from the flood of emotions that had been unleashed. The image of his father, Kaki, a man he had never known, lying broken and bleeding, haunted him. He could see it all so clearly in his mind's eye, the pain, the desperation, the final moments of a life cut short by violence and treachery. But amidst the sorrow and anger, there was something else, a sense of resolve, of purpose. Kodo knew that he could not let his father's death go unanswered. He had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. Did my father's death have anything to do with Ruda or his family? Kodo questioned, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and apprehension. Joku's expression grew somber as he considered Kodo's inquiry. There were rumors, he admitted reluctantly. Whispers of foul play and sinister machinations, but nothing was ever proven. Your father's death was officially ruled as a tragic accident, and any investigation into the matter was swiftly quashed. Those who might have known the truth either disappeared or were silenced. The system is often corrupt, Kodo, and those with power can bend it to their will. Anguish gnawed at Kodo's heart as he grappled with the harsh reality of his past. The memories of his fathers, both taken from him before their time, fueled a burning desire for retribution. Yet, he knew that vengeance would only perpetuate the cycle of violence and despair. Still, he could not ignore the possibility that Ruda's rise to power had been built on the bodies of those he had destroyed. "I will uncover the truth," Kodo vowed, his voice echoing with steely determination. "For my fathers, and for the sake of Gorillist. No matter the cost, justice will prevail." Joku regarded Kodo with a mixture of admiration and concern, sensing the weight of the burden that lay ahead. "Remember, Kodo," he cautioned, his voice tinged with wisdom. "The path to justice is fraught with peril. It will test your resolve, your courage, and your very soul. But with courage and perseverance, you will prevail." Kodo nodded, his resolve unwavering. He knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, but he could no longer turn away from the path that had been laid before him. He had to see it through, for his father, for President Natsu, and for himself. But as Joku's words of encouragement echoed in his ears, Kodo's mind was drawn to another figure from his past, a figure who had been a constant presence in his thoughts, even if he had never known her in life. "What about my mother?" Kodo asked quietly, his voice laced with sorrow. "What happened to her after my father's death?" A legacy of love and loss. The room was thick with emotion, the air heavy with the weight of the past. Kodo sat across from Joku, his heart pounding in his chest as the old chimpanzee continued to recount the tragic tale of his parents. Kodo's hands trembled, and his eyes were wide with a mixture of shock, sorrow, and a deep yearning to know more. He felt as if the ground beneath him had been ripped away, leaving him teetering on the edge of an abyss. Joku's voice trembled with emotion as he spoke, his words carrying the echoes of a painful history. "Your mother's tears flowed incessantly at the loss of your father," he began, his voice soft yet heavy with the burden of memory. When Kaki let out that resounding roar, it was as if the very world itself had split open. The sound was so powerful, so primal, that it stirred you from your sleep upstairs. You were just a child, innocent and unaware of the tragedy unfolding below. Kodo's breath hitched in his throat as he imagined the scene, his father's final moments filled with pain and rage, his mother's heart breaking with each passing second. He could almost hear the echoes of that roar, reverberating through the walls of the home he had never known. Joku continued, his voice growing softer as he recalled the heartbreaking details. "Your mother, engulfed in grief, embraced your father's lifeless form, momentarily oblivious to your wailing cries. She was lost in her sorrow, holding onto the man she had loved with all her heart, unable to accept the reality of his death. I stood there, rendered speechless, my heart heavy with the weight of a fallen hero, a departed friend, and a mentor lost to eternity. The emotions coursing through me at that moment defy adequate description." Kodo felt his chest tighten as he listened, the pain of his parents' loss cutting through him like a knife. He could hardly believe what he was hearing, this tale of love and sacrifice, of unbearable grief and unimaginable loss. It was as if he were hearing the story of someone else's life, a life that had once been his but had been stolen away before he could ever know it. As Joku reminisced, Kodo urged him to continue, desperate to hear more. "What happened next?" he asked, his voice trembling with urgency. "Please, tell me everything." Joku nodded, understanding Kodo's need to know, to piece together the fragments of his past. He took a deep breath before resuming the story. "Your mother finally rose from her grief-stricken embrace and ascended the stairs to where you lay crying. She cradled you in her arms, her tears falling onto your tiny face, and brought you down to lay beside your father. Your inconsolable cries echoed in the room, mingling with the silence of death that had settled over everything. In that moment, your mother gazed at both of you, one now gone, the other still a child. And in that silence, something changed within her." Kodo listened, his heart aching with the image of his mother, torn between the loss of her husband and the love for her child. He could almost see her, standing there with him in her arms, her eyes filled with a mix of despair and determination. Suddenly, Joku continued, "Your mother stopped crying. She shut her eyes for half a minute, and in that time, I believe a plan took shape in her mind. She turned to me, her eyes filled with a kind of desperate resolve, and she said, 'Joku, do me this favor. Care for Kodo and guide him to become a good person.' With those words, she entrusted you to my care. Kodo's tears flowed freely now, the pain of his mother's sacrifice overwhelming him. He could barely see Joku through the blur of his tears, but he listened intently as the old chimpanzee's voice continued, carrying the weight of a memory that had haunted him for years. I took you from her arms, Joku said, his voice trembling with emotion. You were crying so loudly, as if you sensed the unraveling threads of familial ties, as if you knew what was about to happen. I tried to comfort you, to soothe your cries, but even as I did, your mother turned back to your father. She picked up his machete, the same weapon he had used to fight off his attackers, and with a single, swift motion, she drove it deep into her own heart. Kodo gasped, the breath catching in his throat as Joku's words sank in. He felt as if the air had been knocked out of him, as if the world had suddenly gone cold and dark. The image of his mother, so full of grief and despair that she had taken her own life, was almost too much to bear. Joku's voice broke as he continued, his own grief evident in the tremor of his words. I was so focused on comforting you that I couldn't turn in time to stop her. The moment I realized what she was doing, it was already too late. The machete struck true, and she collapsed beside your father, her life ebbing away with each passing second. I rushed to her side, but there was nothing I could do. Her final words were a faint, unfinished murmur, as if she were trying to say something more, but death claimed her before she could. Kodo's sobs shook his entire body as the full weight of his parents' tragic demise settled upon him. In the span of a single day, he had lost both his mother and father, thrust into a world of pain and loss that he could hardly comprehend. The anguish he felt cut deep, the pinnacle of human suffering etched into his soul. Words failed him, leaving Kodo in a state of utter despair. He was confronted with the harshness of his circumstances, unsure how to articulate the profound grief within him. In this moment of shared sorrow, Joku, too, felt the depth of Kodo's pain. The weight of the gorilla's anguish bore heavily on Joku, creating an unspoken connection in the face of life's cruel twists. For years, Joku had carried the burden of this story, the knowledge of what had happened to Kodo's parents, and now, at last, he had shared it with the one person who needed to hear it most. Kodo struggled to process the heartbreaking revelations, a myriad of emotions surging within him, grief, disbelief, and a profound sense of loss. The realization that he had been orphaned in the cruelest of ways left him reeling, grappling with the harsh truth of his existence. It was as if the world had been turned upside down, leaving him adrift in a sea of pain and confusion. My parents. Kodo's voice cracked, the words barely a whisper as he struggled to articulate the pain coursing through him. They sacrificed everything for me, and I never even knew. Joku's expression softened, his wise eyes reflecting the depth of Kodo's suffering. Their love for you knew no bounds, he murmured, his voice heavy with sorrow. In their final moments, they entrusted you to my care, knowing that I would watch over you as if you were my own kin. They wanted you to have a life free from the dangers and pain that had claimed them. They wanted you to grow up strong and brave, to live a life that would honor their memory. The weight of Joku's words settled upon Kodo like a heavy shroud, enveloping him in a cloak of solemnity. The realization that he had been left alone in the world, orphaned by the cruel hand of fate, left him feeling adrift, lost amidst the tumult of his emotions. He had always known that his life had been marked by tragedy, but the full extent of that tragedy was almost too much to bear. Yet, amidst the darkness that threatened to consume him, a flicker of determination ignited within Kodo's heart. He could not let his parents' sacrifices be in vain. He could not let their love, their courage, their strength be forgotten. I will honor their memory, he vowed, his voice trembling with resolve. I will carry on their legacy, fighting for justice and righteousness in their name. Joku nodded solemnly, a silent understanding passing between them. In that moment, a bond forged in sorrow bound them together, uniting them in their shared grief and determination to persevere against the odds. Kodo knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that he would face challenges and dangers beyond anything he had ever imagined, but he also knew that he could not turn away from the path that lay before him. As the weight of his parents' legacy settled upon his shoulders, Kodo felt a renewed sense of purpose stirring within him. Though the road ahead would be fraught with challenges and adversity, he knew that he could not falter, not when the memory of his parents and their unwavering love fueled his resolve. With Joku by his side, Kodo embarked on a journey of self-discovery and redemption, determined to honor the sacrifices of those who had come before him. He would uncover the truth, seek justice for the wrongs that had been done, and ensure that the legacy of his parents lived on. Threads of fate and compassion. In the dimly lit room where Kodo sat opposite Joku, the air hummed with the weight of untold stories, each revelation casting a new light on the tapestry of Kodo's past. Joku's voice, steady and full of wisdom, wove the threads of history, connecting the dots that had shaped Kodo's life in ways he had never imagined. With each word, the chimpanzee peeled back the layers of time, revealing a narrative rich with sacrifice, compassion, and the quiet acts of heroism that had gone unnoticed. The memory of General Hurus's unexpected act of kindness lingered in the air like a delicate melody, haunting yet strangely comforting. Kodo couldn't help but marvel at the depth of Hurus's empathy, a trait that seemed at odds with the fierce reputation of the renowned military leader. The contrast between Hurus's public persona and his private act of compassion intrigued Kodo, stirring a mix of emotions within him. So, General Hurus, he refused to accept victory at the potential Admiralty Committee out of sympathy for me? Kodo's voice carried a note of disbelief, mingled with a newfound sense of gratitude for the man who had unknowingly altered the course of his destiny. Joku nodded solemnly, his wise eyes reflecting the gravity of the moment. "Yes, young Kodo," he affirmed, his voice tinged with reverence. General Hurus's decision was a testament to his integrity and compassion. Though he was poised to claim victory, he chose instead to honor the memory of your parents and the injustice of their untimely demise. His refusal to accept the title of Admiral was his way of acknowledging the unfairness of the situation, a silent tribute to the sacrifices your family made. Kodo absorbed this revelation in silence, a profound sense of awe washing over him. He had never imagined that the man he had once viewed as a distant figure of authority could harbor such depth of feeling. In that moment, General Hurus's stature seemed to grow in Kodo's eyes, transforming from a mere military leader into a symbol of humanity and compassion. The image of Hurus as a cold, calculating figure began to shift, replaced by the realization that even in the harsh world of politics and warfare, there existed moments of profound empathy. And what of the potential Admiralty Committee? Kodo ventured, curiosity tugging at his heartstrings. Was it truly disbanded after my parents' death? Joku nodded again, his expression tinged with a hint of regret. Indeed, he confirmed. Your parents' tragic passing cast a shadow over the committee, leaving it dormant for many years. The grief and loss that followed their deaths were so profound that the committee members found it difficult to continue. It wasn't until your emergence, along with Ruta, that the committee was revitalized, heralding a new era of hope and possibility. The mention of Ruta's name sparked a flicker of emotion in Kodo's heart, a complex tapestry of admiration and resentment woven together. Despite the enmity that had grown between them, Kodo couldn't deny the pivotal role that Ruta had played in shaping his destiny. The history between them was fraught with tension and rivalry, yet intertwined with a shared past that neither could fully escape. And what of Ruta? Kodo asked, his voice betraying a hint of bitterness. What role did he play in all of this? Joku's gaze softened, his wise eyes filled with understanding. Ruta's path intertwined with yours in ways both profound and unforeseen, he explained. Though his actions may have been driven by ambition and self-interest, there is no denying the impact he had on your life. From a young age, he was groomed for leadership, trained to wield power with precision. His path was always one of ambition, of reaching for heights that few could aspire to. Kodo listened intently, grappling with the complex emotions that Joku's words stirred within him. He thought of the man Ruta had become, the ruthless president who had taken Durika from him, the figure who seemed to embody everything Kodo had come to despise. And yet, Joku's words reminded him that Ruta was also a product of his upbringing, shaped by the same forces that had influenced Kodo's own life. Ruta's rise to power was not without its sacrifices, Joku continued, his voice tinged with a hint of sadness. He, too, lost much along the way, his humanity, perhaps, and the ability to see others as more than just tools to be used. But in his quest for power, he also revived the potential Admiralty Committee, bringing it back to life after years of dormancy. In doing so, he created a platform for you to step into the light, for your own talents to be recognized. Kodo struggled with this revelation, torn between his anger towards Ruta and the realization that, in some twisted way, their fates were intertwined. Ruta's actions, however self-serving, had inadvertently provided Kodo with the opportunity to rise, to prove himself in the same arena where his father had once stood. It was a bitter pill to swallow, knowing that the very man he viewed as his enemy had played a role in shaping his destiny. But why? Kodo asked, his voice thick with emotion. Why did it have to be this way? Why did Ruta do all of this, revive the committee, take Durika, and manipulate everything around him? What drives him? Joku sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of years of observation and understanding. Ruta is driven by a hunger for power, a desire to control his own destiny and the destinies of those around him. It's a hunger that has consumed him, blinding him to the pain he causes others. He believes that by controlling everything, he can protect himself from the uncertainties of life, from the kind of losses that you and I have endured. Kodo's heart ached with the complexity of it all, the realization that Ruta, despite his cruelty, was also a man shaped by fear, by the desire to shield himself from the world's harsh realities. But that understanding did little to ease the pain Ruta had caused, the wounds that Kodo carried deep within his soul. As he sat there, lost in thought, Kodo's mind wandered to another question, one that had lingered at the edges of his consciousness since Joku had begun revealing the truth. How did I end up at the Kodo orphanage? Kodo asked, his eyes searching Joku's face for answers. Why didn't you keep me with you? Joku's expression grew somber, and he hesitated for a moment before answering. I wanted to, Kodo, he admitted, his voice tinged with regret. But I was not equipped to care for a child. I lacked the resources, the stability, and most importantly, the knowledge of how to raise a young gorilla in a world that was growing increasingly dangerous. I visited you often, watched over you, and made sure that you were safe, but I knew that you needed more than I could provide. Kodo nodded, understanding the difficult choice Joku had made. He could sense the sorrow in Joku's voice, the regret of not being able to do more. But there was also a deep gratitude within him, a recognition of the sacrifices Joku had made to ensure his safety. That's when Natsu came into the picture, Joku continued, his tone softening as he spoke of the man who had become Kodo's adoptive father. Natsu was a rare gem, a benevolent figure who saw something special in you. He took you in as his own, raising you with the love and care that only a true father could provide. He taught you martial arts, instilled in you the values of honor and justice, and prepared you for the challenges you would face in life. As Kodo listened, tears welled up in his eyes, tracing silent paths down his cheeks. The weight of gratitude and realization bore down upon him, manifesting in those tears, a hero's tears, born of the knowledge that he had been loved, protected, and guided by not one, but two remarkable figures in his life. Kodo's voice trembled with emotion as he spoke, I owe everything to Natsu. He gave me a second chance, a life filled with purpose and meaning. I only wish I had known the full truth sooner, so I could have thanked him properly, so I could have honored both him and my biological parents the way they deserved. Joku reached out, placing a comforting hand on Kodo's shoulder. You honor them every day, Kodo, he said gently. In the way you live, in the choices you make, and in the strength you carry within you. They live on through you, their legacy, their love, their sacrifices. It's all part of who you are, and it will guide you as you continue to navigate the path ahead. In the dimly lit room, Kodo and Joku sat in silence, the weight of the past heavy upon them. But within that silence, there was also a sense of peace, a recognition of the bonds that connected them, of the love that had shaped Kodo's life, even in the face of unimaginable loss. The unveiling of Zeon. The room was thick with a sense of impending revelation, the kind that shifts the very foundation of one's identity. Kodo sat in tense anticipation, his eyes locked onto Joku, who held the key to a truth that had been buried for decades. The air between them seemed to hum with the weight of what was about to be revealed, a moment that would change everything Kodo thought he knew about himself. As the conversation with Joku took an unexpected turn, Kodo found himself on the precipice of a revelation that would upend his life. Joku's demeanor, always shrouded in a quiet wisdom, now bore an air of mystery as he prepared to share a truth long hidden. His eyes, deep and knowing, held Kodo's gaze as he spoke, each word carefully chosen. Before we go further, Joku began, his voice steady but tinged with a gravity that made Kodo's heart pound. There is something you must know, something your parents intended for you to learn when the time was right. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, heavy with significance. Your name, the name given to you at birth, was not Kodo. It was Zeon. Kodo's breath caught in his throat. The name, Zeon, reverberated in his mind, sending shockwaves through his soul. It was a name he had never heard before, yet it felt strangely familiar, as if it had been waiting in the depths of his subconscious for this very moment to resurface. The revelation unfurled like the delicate petals of a flower, each layer revealing more of the identity that had been hidden from him for so long. Zeon, Kodo whispered, the name rolling off his tongue with a mix of awe and disbelief. How is this possible? Joku's response was measured, his eyes reflecting the solemnity of the moment. Your parents chose the name Zeon with great care and foresight, he explained. It was a name imbued with the hope of a brighter future, a future where you would rise to overcome the challenges that lay ahead. Your father, Kaki, and your mother wanted you to carry a name that symbolized victory on every front, a name that would inspire strength and resilience. Kodo sat in stunned silence, his mind reeling from the weight of this revelation. Zeon, a name that carried with it the hopes and dreams of his parents, a name that now connected him to a legacy he had never fully understood. The realization that he had lived his entire life under an assumed name sent shockwaves through his soul, stirring a tumult of emotions within him. As the truth settled over him like a heavy cloak, Kodo couldn't help but feel a sense of loss for the identity he had never known. But at the same time, a flicker of gratitude began to emerge, a gratitude for the parents who had bestowed upon him a name filled with hope and promise, even in the face of adversity. Though they had been taken from him far too soon, their legacy lived on in the echoes of his true name, Zeon. Why did I never know this? Kodo asked, his voice tinged with a mix of sadness and curiosity. Why was my name changed? Joku's expression grew somber, the weight of the past heavy in his gaze. Your parents had many enemies, Kodo, he said, his voice low and serious. After your father was killed, and your mother took her own life, I knew that keeping your true identity hidden was the only way to protect you. There were those who would have hunted you down, who would have tried to eliminate any trace of your family. To keep you safe, I had to erase the name Zeon from history and give you a new identity, one that would allow you to live, to grow, without the constant threat of danger. The passage of time and the ominous specter of those responsible for his father's assassination cast a long shadow over his newfound identity, prompting Joku to orchestrate this clandestine change. The old adage, to kill the grass is to destroy the root, guided my decision, Joku continued. By burying the name Zeon deep beneath the layers of time and memory, I hope to protect you from those who would have sought to destroy you. And so, I chose the name Kodo, a name that would allow you to navigate the challenges ahead without drawing undue attention, without the weight of your past bearing down on you. Kodo absorbed Joku's words in silence, the enormity of the chimpanzee's actions slowly sinking in. Gratitude welled up within him as he realized the lengths Joku had gone to for his safety. The chimpanzee had not only protected him from physical harm, but had also ensured that he could live a life free from the burden of his parents' past. Though he would never know the full extent of Joku's efforts on his behalf, he felt a profound sense of indebtedness to the chimpanzee who had watched over him from the shadows, guiding him with a silent hand. Thank you, Kodo finally said, his voice thick with emotion. I can't imagine the sacrifices you must have made to protect me. I'm only here because of you. Joku smiled, a gentle, understanding expression that conveyed more than words ever could. You are here because of the strength and love of your parents, he replied. I merely did what I could to honor their wishes. You have always carried their spirit within you, Kodo Zion. That strength, that resilience, it is a part of who you are, no matter what name you go by. As Kodo grappled with the weight of his newfound identity, he couldn't shake the nagging sense of unease that gnawed at the edges of his consciousness. His entire life had been built on a foundation that now seemed uncertain, and the realization left him feeling adrift, struggling to reconcile the fragments of his past with the stark reality of his present. "Do you remember where my house is?" Kodo inquired, seeking a tangible link to his past amidst the sea of uncertainty that now engulfed him. He needed something to ground him, something to remind him of the life he had lived before everything had been turned upside down. Joku's response was immediate, his voice tinged with a hint of nostalgia. "Unforgettable," he murmured, the memories of Kodo's childhood home springing to life in vivid detail. "Your house was a beacon of warmth and laughter, a sanctuary amidst the chaos of the world outside. I remember every detail, every corner, as if it were yesterday." Upon hearing this, a longing stirred within Kodo, a desire to return to the place where his journey had begun, to reconnect with the memories that had shaped him. With Joku by his side, he decided to visit the house that had once been his home, to confront the ghosts of his past and make peace with the life he had lost. As they approached the dilapidated remnants of Kodo's childhood home, a wave of bittersweet nostalgia washed over him. The house, now reclaimed by nature, stood as a silent witness to the passage of more than 3 decades. The walls, once vibrant with the echoes of laughter and love, were now covered in vines and moss, the windows broken and the roof caved in. Kodo stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath his feet, and was immediately hit by a flood of memories. He could almost see his parents in the rooms where they had once lived, hear their voices, feel their presence. The warmth of their love, the joy of their laughter, it all came rushing back to him in a torrent of emotion. In one corner of the living room, he imagined his father, Kaki, practicing his martial arts, his movements fluid and powerful. In another, he saw his mother, tenderly cradling him in her arms, her eyes filled with love and devotion. The memories were so vivid, so real, that for a moment, he felt as if he had stepped back in time, as if they were still there with him. But the reality of the present quickly reasserted itself, and Kodo was left standing in the ruins of what had once been a home filled with life and warmth. The contrast between the past and the present was stark, a painful reminder of all that had been lost. As Kodo wandered through the house, his mind drifted back to the name Zion, the name his parents had given him. It was a name that carried with it the weight of their hopes and dreams, a name that had been meant to inspire him to greatness. But now, standing amidst the ruins of his past, Kodo couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss for the life he might have lived, the person he might have become if things had been different. And yet, he knew that he could not dwell on what might have been. He had been given a second chance at life, a chance to honor the legacy of his parents and to forge his own path. The name Zion may have been hidden from him, but its spirit had always been a part of him, guiding him, giving him strength. With a deep breath, Kodo turned to Joku, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and resolve. "Thank you for bringing me here," he said, his voice steady. "I needed to see this, to remember where I came from." Joku nodded, his expression one of understanding. "Your past is a part of you, Zion," he said softly. "But it does not define you. What matters now is the future, the choices you make, the path you choose to walk. Your parents gave you the name Zion with the hope that you would rise above the challenges you faced, and I believe that you have. You are a warrior, Kodo, and you carry their legacy within you." As Kodo stood in the doorway of his childhood home, the weight of his past heavy upon his shoulders, he knew that he was at a crossroads. The journey that lay ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was ready to face them, armed with the knowledge of his true identity and the strength of his convictions. With one final look at the house that had once been his home, Kodo turned and walked away, leaving the past behind him but carrying its lessons in his heart. He was Zion, the name given to him by his parents, a name that symbolized hope, strength, and victory. And with Joku by his side, he was ready to embrace the future, to fight for justice, and to honor the legacy of those who had come before him. As the sun began to set on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the landscape, Kodo felt a sense of peace settle over him. The path ahead would not be easy, but he was no longer alone. He had his name, his legacy, and the support of those who believed in him. And with that, he knew that he could face whatever challenges lay ahead.